Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another bright day in a rather deserted city of Westminster in these current times, as once again we put the topic of leadership under the spotlight. I am your host, Scott Challoner, and I'm joined on today's programme by Sajid Moghal. Sajid is a director at Jap Performance Parts, a company which specialises in high-performance Japanese cars, tuning parts and spares. Sajid, welcome to the programme, and it's great to have you on the air with us today.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
Thank you for taking the time, of course, to join us on this fine day. It's certainly a very nice day for it. The purpose of this discussion, Sajid, is to really understand your take on leadership. So if we dive into that first and foremost and just look at that word leader in isolation, what does that word actually mean to you? How does it resonate?
Well, I guess in context of my role as director of a small business, we're a team of 8 staff, and my role as leader I see as someone who provides guidance, support, direction, as well as a business to staff. I think it's equally as important to lead people as well as leading a business. So there's lots of elements of it in that respect. It's not just being a figurehead, I guess. It's lots of sort of softer issues to support as well, looking after people's interests, work and outside of work too.
Very important points there regarding, of course, people management and safeguarding people's interests. As a leader, it's incredibly important to be able to take people with you in that regard. And it's far easier to do that when you are, of course, obviously on an equal footing with them and really looking out for them in that sense. And that, I think, is no more relevant than it is now, of course, with the current COVID-19 situation. A lot of uncertainty, of course, a lot of worry and a lot of pressure on leaders to keep the communication channels open and really provide that vital reassurance for the future that their employees need. How has that been for you, Sajid, in the last few weeks?
I think you sort of mentioned one point there, which was the critical issue for me. Mid-March, as soon as the lockdown was announced, we automatically started to look at sort of making our site secure, premises secure. But the key thing was, how do I look after my staff? And all of a sudden, there was a bit of a panic. If our business is turned off, our taps turned off, there's no income, business will shut down. How do my staff put food on the table? How do they pay their rent and look after families? And it was a real panic for me, to be honest with you, at that time. And then as soon as within a couple of days, the government announced the furlough scheme, that was a real relief, and we could take a breath and make sure that our staff are going to be looked after. So that certainly changed things for us and made things a little bit more comfortable to be able to deal with the issues coming after that. And we've put them on furlough. We communicated with them throughout to make sure everyone involved is going to retain their jobs. This is critical because my staff, they're like family here. We're a small business. They've been loyal. We've been together for many, many years, and I wouldn't want any of them to go.
And do you think that they've responded well to this situation in the circumstances, Sajid? Reason I ask that question is because we often see in times of adversity that it really does bring out the best in those around us. And we've heard a lot of stories, of course, of people being brought closer together and really plugging away to keep things ticking over because, of course, their leaders are looking out for their interests.
That's true. And having a loyal team is it's not easy to achieve, and over the years we've obviously had many different staff come through the company. So once you've got a good pool of people, you've got to look after them, and in the same way they look after you. So we are a real team. It's not just a boss and staff. We all work together. We have our tea breaks together. We work side by side. So it's a real sort of joint thing, and I think they appreciate the fact that we've looked after their interests and made sure that they're safe and catered for, and they're all happy to come back. Obviously complying with the rules the government or the guidance giving in managing the workplace safely.
And when it comes to the future as well, the new COVID secure guidelines are of course forthcoming, and there's been a lot of debate over how clear the new guidelines are really going to be, and businesses again having to be flexible and adaptable to be ready for these changing circumstances. Do you think that everything's been clear enough from the government point of view so far and their leadership has been effective through this?
I'll be honest with you, my concern right now is interpretation. Having read the guidance on workplace safety, a lot of it is down to interpretation. And I'm finding within my industry, generally businesses didn't close like we did. They kept the doors open. They were dealing with the public. And it's like I say, it's interpretation. If one business owner interprets things another way, they will allow people to interact. They will allow customers in. They won't manage things as carefully as others. And I think that's one of the things that's concerned me about the guidance. It's not been crystal clear. It's left things to interpretation, which I felt there's a risk of people doing the wrong thing.
I can certainly see where you're coming from that point of view, Sajid. And something that's really been brought to the fore in this debate as well over the COVID-19 response has been proactive versus reactive in terms of responses. Reason being is because you mentioned, of course, the UK lockdown that began on the 23rd of March, of course, and a lot of people have compared that to, say, China or even Italy, where the Italian lockdown, of course, occurred from as early as the 9th of March, and we took a little bit of a laissez-faire approach for the following couple of weeks before then imposing harder measures ourselves. When difficulties do tend to arise in an everyday setting, Sajid, if we take that away from this situation for a moment and away from politics as a whole, do you tend to dive straight in and get on top of difficulties as and when they emerge, or do you like to sort of sit back a little bit, see how matters develop, and then take action from that stage?
I guess difficulties, I think as a business leader, you've got to be decisive, and I think we try and make decisions, resolve things. In a general business scenario, if you've got issues with products or customers or a situation like that, I think the quicker you deal with it, the better it is, and you can come up with a solution and move on. Sometimes delaying a decision to deal with a problem can cause ill feeling and misunderstanding and so on. So I think it's better to be decisive and quicker rather than let things prolong.
And of course, it's been a very tragic time, this whole COVID situation, absolutely. But do you think that, in a way, there are some real positives to be taken from this? Not just obviously in the sense that we have this like kind of newfound unity, this new focus on health and well-being and mental health especially, but also the fact that it's breeding resilience in those businesses that do get through it. It's having leaders get experience in crisis management. It's thrusting employees out of their comfort zones. And in a way, that's really helping in people's development, isn't it?
It is, for sure. And one thing I've started, I'm not IT savvy. About a month ago, we started looking at alternatives to how do we run our business. And we started looking online and working with a company in Dubai, a film company. And they suggested we should be looking at groups. And it sort of sparked an idea. While things are down, while our customers, our European-based trade customers, businesses are shut, why don't we help them? And what we did, we set up a group to invite them in and invite industry leaders, business leaders and manufacturers to come into the group, share their ideas, their strategies, their new products, their new services. So while things are quiet, we can learn new skills, learn new products, learn new services and offer these to our customers. And that's really taken off well. We've had so much support from business leaders, and what I do is I do a regular interview myself with them online, and our client base can ask questions, so an interaction thing. And that's really sort of taken off. And we're looking at lots of ideas to expand and explore this, to give something back while businesses are struggling, and hopefully give them new ideas so when they come back out of this, they can come back stronger.
Seems very much that's on the innovation side of things, and that's going to be incredibly important as business adapts to the new normal as well, of course, Sajid. And if
it is. I think at this time we need to be innovative, and I'm looking at new ways of working. We're looking to have more of a digital presence, more than we ever had, and also allow our customers to be able to interact with us online. Our business is very hands-on; it's very face-to-face, and I see that as a struggle for this year at least, and maybe even longer. So if we can offer customers an online way of interacting, whether it's through video calls or live chats, or it's through just other media, or we can present ideas that way, then we should be exploring that.
Exactly right. I think it's very important for businesses to be adaptable and to innovate in order to not just, of course, assure longevity, but also just be ready for this new way of working that's going to be the case once we emerge from all of this. And based upon all the experience that you have accumulated, Sajid, not just, of course, through this crisis, but also beforehand when you were working in business, if you were to actually give some advice to somebody in the younger generation who is about to maybe start their first day in a leadership role, what sort of advice would you give them?
From my experiences in leadership, I've worked for government agencies in the past. And it's always been my approach. Leadership has always been part of a team. You have to lead from the front, but I think also be shoulder to shoulder with your staff, and maybe work a day in their shoes so you can appreciate that. I think they'll respect you for doing that too. So it's not always leading, being a dictator at the top. I think it's a bit of everything. It's having a mixed style, and sometimes you have to be a social worker. Sometimes you have to be a strict boss. I find every member of your team you have to deal with in a different way to get the best out of them. Sometimes one style doesn't work for all.
Exactly right. It's all down to people management, isn't it, in that respect? And as you say, one size doesn't fit all in that sense. So it takes a good leader to be adaptable, to understand when one person needs one thing to motivate them and when one needs another. For example, an arm around their shoulder, maybe a kick up the backside when necessary. It's about knowing that, isn't it? Knowing the people around you.
Of course.
And
I
think it's just as important as well as a leader to very carefully pick the people that you surround yourself with as well, isn't it? Because it's just as much about them getting the best out of you as their leader, as well as vice versa, you getting the best out of them.
That's right. I think over the years, I've changed my view to leadership as well. And as a younger person, always you're ambitious, trying to achieve for yourself, and sort of coming towards middle age now, running this business. I have a team, and I feel a duty to allow them to progress. So we've looked at courses, looking at apprenticeships to build up their skills. You know, we don't expect staff to stay with us forever, but if we can help their future progression in their careers, then we should have some sort of social responsibility to do that as well. So we try and give something back to our staff where we can, so they are qualified to move on to different things once they do decide to leave us, as and when.
And if we now think about the future, Sajid, and what that might hold before we do wrap things up on the programme today, do give me an idea of what you envision the next year will hold for yourself and for Jap Performance Parts as a business, and also what you hope to achieve, not just in getting through this current COVID situation, but also when we emerge from the pandemic and look into the future.
That's a difficult question to answer because there are still so many uncertainties, but based on how this last 2 months has gone, we have been as busy as ever as a business, although lots of other stresses and issues to manage around that. I'm hoping this year we can sustain this level of business, although it's less than the start of the year. I don't really envisage growth, but I guess that may be down to us to rethink why there isn't growth and look at innovative ways of trying to increase business. So I think it's been a wake-up call in terms of technology, social media or digital presence, those sort of things which I haven't really considered, is something that I'm focusing a lot of my energy on now and will do for the rest of the year. And maybe that will be a new way of doing business, and maybe the following year or the year after, that will change how we approach our marketing.
Exactly right. It's going to be really changing times, Sajid, for sure. And I think, given how informative it's been on the having you on the programme today, I think it would be wonderful to actually catch up in the next year once we start to see how things are altering in that respect, just to catch up on how the business is getting on and just discuss some of the new initiatives that you are getting involved in as well at that point.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to come back and tell you what we're up to.
I think that would be fantastic. It's a shame that we don't have more time today on the programme. Otherwise, of course, we could discuss it for hours, I'm sure. But it's been a real pleasure, Sajid, having you on the programme. I've really, really enjoyed it. And as I say, it's been an incredibly informative experience as well as anything else. And thank you for taking the time to come and share those views, not just for myself, but also for the listeners tuning into this.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Sajid, and do take care and do stay safe as well in the meantime with everything still going on for sure. That was Sajid Moghal, Director at Jap Performance Parts. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with Sir Andrew Strauss. Sir Andrew is currently the Director of Cricket for the England and Wales Cricket Board. During his playing days, Sir Andrew was England captain. He's one of only 3 England skippers, in fact, to have secured the Ashes both at home and away in Australia, but he's also the England captain with the second highest number of Test victories under his belt in history. And I hope you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking with him. That's coming up next.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jonathan White, and today we are joined by Sir Andrew Strauss, former captain of the England cricket team and former director of cricket at the ECB. Sir Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today.
Real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure is all of ours. You know, and you've had a distinguished career, as I said, both on and off the pitch in English cricket, recognised not least with your knighthood for services to sport just last year. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, there have been ups and downs in the career, like any career, including public and private disagreements with certain individuals. And on that front, I think what everybody wants to know, have you finally forgiven Marcus Trescothick for giving you that stupid Lord Brocket nickname?
Well, my recollection was that it wasn't Marcus Trescothick who gave me that nickname. It was actually Mark Butcher.
He's to blame.
You know, I think there were a lot of people. It was the senior England teams at that time who wanted to sort of put me in my place and make sure that I didn't get above my station. So thankfully it didn't particularly stick other than within those group of players.
And you really did try and get on their nerves by getting above your station because, of course, in your first outing, you went on to score 112. Now, am I right in saying this, perhaps, that you only got there because Michael Vaughan did himself an injury?
Well, that was the reason I got on the pitch in the first place. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's often sort of misunderstood or misjudged the role that luck plays in an international cricket or sporting career, full stop. And, you know, I was waiting patiently in the wings for an opportunity, and it didn't really seem like an opportunity was going to come along. And then, you know, I've only got injured in the nets, and there was my chance, and I had to kind of grab it with both hands if I could.
And you certainly did. What was it like then to see your name being put up on the Lord's Honour Board after your first appearance?
Yeah, look, I'd just been transported to a completely different world almost. I was a Middlesex player, I was captain of Middlesex, all my focus was on helping Middlesex sort of win the championship and whatever. And then a week later, I've scored a test century, which is something I'd always dreamed out, you know, literally all my life. And then the thought of doing it at Lord's in your first test match. I mean, it was literally the dream. So, and then suddenly I started thinking, wow, hold on, potentially I've got a whole England career ahead of me and everything that entails. So it was a real shock to the system. But I suppose what I was grateful for was that I was relatively old, probably not the right way of putting it, but I was 27 years of age. I was pretty comfortable with my own game. And I was also, I think, mature enough to understand that this was a great opportunity for me, but not to get carried away with it, which is unfortunately what happens with a lot of younger players.
Without a doubt. And I think in those early years of your career, it's so important, I think you'd agree, especially when you're learning from other more experienced people. And this can be true of any field, whether it's sports or politics or business, to have somebody there that you can rely on or look up to for guidance. In those early days, was there somebody that you could say to this day that, thank goodness they were there for you?
Well, I think in preparing me for international cricket, Justin Langer was a massive source of advice for me. So he was captain of Middlesex a couple of years beforehand and really helped me understand what I needed to do to get there. But then I think on a day-to-day basis, my wife Ruth played a huge role, you know, just in terms of, because I think there is that real danger that you get carried away with it and you think international sport in that goldfish bowl that, you know, you're more important than you were previously, or that whole world is the real world. And obviously all we know is that the real world, nothing's changed other than other people's perception of you.
And you need that grounding. And again, that can be true of so many different areas of life.
I think so, yeah. I mean, very easy to get caught up in it and end up doing different things, being with different people, sort of trying to enjoy everything that goes with international cricket rather than focusing on the actual international cricket.
And
itself.
In those early days, Andrew, there were lots of examples where you could have got carried away because that team accomplished so much. I think for a lot of people, the 2005 Ashes series is one of the greatest sporting moments of this country's history. Now, we could chat for hours about that, but I know I wouldn't be allowed to, and you've got other places to be, so we can't do that. But if I may, I would love to ask what your highlight was personally for that, but perhaps more importantly, as a team, how were you able as a group to deal with the pressure no doubt you were feeling?
Yeah, well, the pressure is like nothing else that I experienced before or after, because, you know, I think it's easy to forget how how much of a holy grail the Ashes was back then. You know, we hadn't won it for so long, and it seemed like we'd come up against these invincible Australian teams year after year. So, you know, the closer we got to it, the harder it became. I remember Ashley Giles walking into the dressing room for I think it was in the final day of the series, and I looked at him, and he looked absolutely terrible, like just white of a sheet, grey. He looked like he'd aged about 5 years. I went, God, Charlie, you're not looking too good. And he went, yeah, it's not surprising. I haven't slept for 8 weeks. And I went, well, join the club. You know, and I think we'd all been sort of living this behind our own closed doors. And it's just an extraordinary thing. And without doubt, the highlight was, number one, drawing that game at the Oval to make sure we won the Ashes, but also the day after, you know, that open-top bus parade around London, and to understand that we'd broken out of the cricket bubble, that just general sports fans or just people that were interested in seeing England win at something were all engaged and completely besotted by the whole thing.
I think that's such a key point, because there were so many people back in 2005 that may have not even given cricket a second glance, and it put a whole new generation, especially of children, school kids, into loving that sport. And so beyond the actual competition itself, what a fantastic thing to be able to say was accomplished for
absolutely. Everything you say there is absolutely right. Like we just sort of opened the doors of cricket to a whole new generation. But probably more importantly, it was the one and only time in my life that I got papped outside a nightclub that night when we were celebrating. You know, I felt like I'd really arrived as a celebrity. Yes. It only happened for that one night, unfortunately.
But I did ask for a highlight, and if you didn't perhaps give a specific one on the pitch, so I would suggest perhaps that catch at Trent Bridge.
No. I mean, the catch at Trent Bridge was, you know, you see a ball, you stick out your hand and it goes in. I think my personal highlight was I scored 100 in that fifth test match under real pressure. And that was one that, you know, that wasn't a moment. That was a number of hours, and I had to dig pretty deep to do that.
Now, obviously, not that long later, and you were lucky enough and the privilege, I'm sure, no doubt, to serve as captain. And whether you like it or not, you become the focal point of criticism. You were looked on, up to, and relied upon to be strong, especially when the going gets tough. You become a leader in many senses of the word. During your time as captain, what qualities does one require to fulfill that role?
Well, a fair amount of resilience for starters. You know, you're absolutely right. You know, I remember when I got the role, it did feel like the biggest sort of poison chalice of all time, and you know, sort of a litany of England captains had sort of been churned up by the job prior to me taking over. So there was that sort of realization this is going to be a tough thing to do, and you're going to have to dig pretty deep. But I think actually the most important thing was sort of just pushing all that noise to one side and just clarifying, okay, if I'm going to do this job, what is it that we really want to achieve out of this? And so suddenly that becomes a bit more exciting and a bit more enticing, the idea of, well, we can do something that's never been done before here, and I've got the opportunity to play my part in that. So, you know, I think that was a big part of it for me. You know, I think a lot of those qualities around leadership, I don't think you know you have them until you're in that situation. Absolutely. It's very hard to prepare yourself properly for those sort of situations.
And when managing a team, you're required to manage, of course, what some people could call big personalities. Others could use different, shorter words. How poisonous can it be, when players, and indeed, and this applies again to so many different areas of life, when individuals think they are perhaps more important than a team?
Well, I think probably worth broadening out that a bit. You know, I think there are all sorts of different people that you have to sort of contend with in a team environment, and the job of the leadership or the management is to try and sort of gel them all together and get them bought into what you're trying to do and whatever. So, you know, there are some people that are a bit more self-absorbed. There's some people that are slightly more maverick in the way they view the world. There's some people that are very quiet. There's some people that are, you know, perhaps very worried about what might go wrong. And so you've got to try and understand all these people individually and try and get the best out of them. But there was definitely a line there for me in terms of embracing difference up to the point where someone following their agenda was going in a completely different path from the team's agenda. And, if and when that happens, that should be a problem for a leadership. And if it isn't a problem, then you're not doing your job properly.
Absolutely. And with all that in mind, actually, and perhaps this is a bit of a mean question, but what advice would you give to others in a similar position, leading a team, being looked up to? What would be the key advice you'd give to them, and that you couldn't really do without it?
Just generally about leading a team?
I think so,
Okay,
yes.
Number one thing about leadership, I'm absolutely certain about this, is that the people you're leading need to know that you care about them. And if they genuinely believe you've got their best interests at heart, they will forgive all sorts of other inadequacies you might have, and I definitely had many. Because they'll know your heart's in the right place, and they'll feel comforted. There'll be a degree of sort of psychological safety or whatever you might term to make sure that the team comes together when the going gets tough. If they genuinely don't believe you care about them and you're in it for yourself, doesn't matter how charismatic you might be. It doesn't matter, how gregarious and how impressive you might be as a person. They will be wary of you, and they will start looking after their own interests very quickly.
Now, in 2015, obviously, you were appointed as director of cricket at the ECB. You took some pretty major steps early on. You brought in Trevor Bayliss as coach, was brought in. You put a much greater emphasis on limited overs cricket. Now, in the abstract, what had you identified that needed to be changed for English cricket? And were there qualities that you had developed, you'd found out you had as England captain, that you were able to bring over the job?
Okay, so the first thing was we had this unbelievable opportunity of the World Cup on home soil in 2019. I was sick and tired of watching us make the same mistakes in World Cups, and this includes my time as captain. We just kept on sleepwalking our way into it and pretending everything would be all right on the night, and it never was. And so I definitely made it our priority to win that 2019 World Cup. I thought that was more important than anything else that was going to be taking place in my tenure. And I knew in order to do that, we had to completely shift our perception of white ball cricket.
Quite a radical shift from what we were coming from.
Yeah, but the rest of the game had moved on.
Yeah.
And the rest of the game had understood that white ball cricket was playing an increasingly important role in both financially, but also in terms of players' focus and interest. Yes. And we had to move. In fact, we didn't have to move at times. We need to get ahead of the time. So, we had to completely shift both our philosophy, but also the way we played in order to do that. And I was very lucky having both Trevor Bayliss and Owen Morgan, who were prepared to sort of role model that and lead that through. And the second part of your question around what had the England captaincy sort of done to prepare me for the role, I think I was comfortable leading. I knew the environment. I knew what I was getting myself into. And in the early days, I could leverage some of the relationships that I had with the players. But actually, I found it a very different challenge because you are so far removed from what's going on the ground. Right. And so, you're relying on other people to have to buy into what you want to happen and then do it themselves. And often, in different time zones in different parts of the world. So that was a very new experience for me.
Well, I think the strategy paid off, and I don't know about you, but when watching that World Cup final, again, as so many people did in this country, it's once again inspired another generation of especially school kids who, again, might not have given cricket a second look, who have now become avid cricket fans. I know of some, and what a wonderful thing that must be.
Yeah, it was an incredible day, wasn't it? I mean, I think in our vision, like when we're talking about the opportunity of winning the 2019 World Cup, I had this vision in my mind of Lords on a sunny day and a close finish and the incredible kind of, emotion that went with it. No one could have dreamt how it played out. I've never seen anything. I've never seen a game of cricket like that in my whole life, and for it to be the World Cup final was quite extraordinary.
I know some fantastically avid cricket fans who were Googling there and then what exactly the rules became, because
so was I. Actually, yeah, absolutely.
Now, Andrew, in your wife's memory, you established the Ruth Strauss Foundation last year. In doing so, whether you'd admit it or not, yourself and the foundation has become an inspiration to thousands, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. Please do take some time, if you wouldn't mind, and you to explain to the listeners the work the foundation does and what it's been like to lead a project like that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, look, I mean, we obviously had a very tough journey as a family. First of all, Ruth being diagnosed. Ruth was someone that was always well. You'd never think she was going to be someone that was sort of laid down by cancer. And for us to find out that she had lung cancer was extraordinary. She'd never smoked a cigarette in her life. And I think we all had this perception of lung cancer being a smoker's disease.
Absolutely.
And so just having gone through the experience and obviously some very low times and us coming to terms with the fact that Ruth had stage 4 cancer and she was going to die, we learnt a lot in that process. And thankfully we had time for me to speak to Ruth before she died about legacy and what we could do to make something positive come out of, this experience we'd all been through. And so after she died in December 2018, I came back and launched the foundation with two focuses. Number one, to fund research into these rare forms of lung cancer. These are the non-smoking lung cancers. 5,000 to 7,000 people each year in this country are diagnosed with these. No one knows why they're getting them, but they're on the increase, and it's young women that are affected more than men.
Extraordinary numbers.
Yeah, I mean, in the list of top 10 cancers, it's number 8. Rare forms of lung cancer, number 8. So it's not really rare. It's probably a misnomer, but it's, we're really lacking in funding and understanding. And then the second element, and probably this is in some ways more pressing, is to help cancer, anyone who's got cancer who has an incurable diagnosis, to help them and their families prepare themselves for death. And so in order to do that, we need to be able to find ways of them having open conversations with each other, because if you do this well, it should help the bereavement afterwards if you're well prepared for it. It's not something people like to do. I was very lucky that Ruth wanted to do it. But also we have to have that debate about the taboo of death and, effectively how uncomfortable we are talking about it, and certainly how bad we are preparing for it. If you think for a moment about antenatal classes before you have your baby, like how we're preparing you for how your life's going to change, and we do nothing around death, even though we're all going to experience it in one way, shape or form. And, I think as a society we need to be better than that. We've come a long way in so many different areas, and especially around mental health, and we can do better about death. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I think the foundation is leading the way in breaking taboos on that front, because they need to be broken. I know the foundation is going out some events later this year, so if you could tell us about some of those, that would be...
Yeah, so we've got a couple of big ones coming up. So the Westminster Mile, which is a very inclusive, if you're think about a marathon, but just think about just doing a mile of a marathon rather than 26.
Sounds ideal.
So we've got grandparents, we've got little kids, we've got people pushing prams, so that we're going to get as many people as possible to play their part in that and raise some funds. We've got the Red for Ruth Day at Lord's again, so that was an incredible day for us last year.
Whether you were there or not, especially if you were there, I mean to say, but whether it was the photos in the papers the next day, what an I think it was the 15th of April, wasn't it? What an extraordinary day, and what an overwhelming day that must have been for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, an Ashes Test match is a big day anyway, yes. And then for us to have that extra element of the Red for Ruth Day, and to see the wave of support, myself and the boys were incredibly profoundly affected by that in a good way. We felt so much love and support there. And then the foundation is directly benefited hugely by the funds raised. And we want to take it up a gear this year and make it more of a community thing, not just the the day at Lords.
I even saw some of the stuffiest members of the MCC, Andrew, wearing red. So what an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, well, a lot of them wear red trousers anyway, I think. But no, absolutely, they were right behind us, and we really want that to be something that's embedded in the English summer, just like the McGrath Foundation Days in Sydney in Australia.
Well, it's been a complete inspiration, and I very much hope we can talk about that perhaps late in a few months as well.
Absolutely.
Before we go, as I'm conscious of the time, it's also an exciting year for domestic cricket, not least because of the introduction of the 100, not without its critics, I should. Andrew, I know you're a big proponent of it. The Blast has clearly shown that the short form of the game has brought cricket to a new and growing audience, exciting games. What do you say to those that ask, why do we need the 100 as well?
So the 100 is the most important step forward in domestic cricket in this country ever. And the reason for that is that increasingly, there's two things. First of all, we need to break out of the cricket bubble. So the Blast followers tend to be the same people that follow other cricket.
Right.
And therefore, that's a small audience and potentially a declining one over time, even though the Blast sales are increasing. We need to break out of that and try and get more general sports fans into cricket. But more importantly, just the way the tournament's set up, and it's one game a day over a 6-week period, broadcasters will pay money for that. And therefore, what we're trying to do is reduce our reliance on international cricket paying all the bills. If you think about Test cricket and some of the issues around the world, we just can't rely on that money coming in to fund the game. So we need to find another way of doing that. I just think it's going to be an incredible success. I'm so excited about it. I know there are people that are worried about it, but in 2 or 3 years' time, we're going to have our own short form tournament that will rival the Big Bash, and we'll be moving towards the IPL. And those are two enormous events out there, and we can have our own version of that ourselves.
I can feel your enthusiasm for it. As an Essex fan, I'm still stumped as to, I think I'm going to have to choose between either supporting a team based at the Oval or a team based at Lords. I'll get over that, but I'll have to do it.
Well, surely it's got to be the Lords one, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sanju, it's been an absolute pleasure discussing that and everything else with you today. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.